Go and check it out.
Mohammed, Israeli forces...
Cast-led protective edge.
Israeli forces don't go into Gaza on one day and grab grandmothers and kill babies in their beds.
Okay.
And
no, hold on.
rape and abuse women.
So, rape, is there any evidence of that?
It's been multiple reports in multiple hatred on both
Nelson
sides.
Mandela?
Yeah, where is that figure?
Nelson Mandela actually have criticized Israel for being a horrible state. All of the South African activists have acted
severely to that. Is ludicrous. And
Jeremy, let me ask you
the idea that Ben Shapiro
question.
should be a moderating voice, that Ben Shapiro should be, saying, no, Israel should not respond in this situation. That's nonsense.
Let me ask you though, Jeremy, the question which I think is the big question. What is a proportionate response to that outrage on October the 7th, which is the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust? What is proportionate, if it's true, as reports are suggesting tonight?
Dear all, welcome back to The Peacemaker by Adnan Habul. Today I'm addressing Mr. Piers Morgan. Dear Mr. Morgan, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Adnan Habul, and I watch your insightful shows on YouTube addressing the complex and sensitive conflict between Israel and Palestine. As someone who has dedicated over 3 decades to international relations and diplomacy, holding a master's degree in the field, I have been compelled to share my perspective on the discussions you facilitated. Your commitment to maintaining professionalism and impartiality in your shows is commendable, and I appreciate the platform you provide for both Israeli and Palestinian representatives to voice their narratives. However, in my observations, I couldn't help but notice a nuanced double-standard approach that merits further explorations. Launching my channel Peacemaker by Adnan Habul just about a month ago, I bring a wealth of professional expertise gained through years of service with the United Nations, the OSCE, or Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and some international NGOs. My intent is not to criticize, but to contribute valuable insight that might be missing from your discourse. In the spirit of fostering understanding and seeking a comprehensive view of the conflict, I'd like to draw your attention to certain facts that, from my perspective, seem to be overlooked. I believe a more nuanced exploration of these aspects could enrich the dialogue and contribute to a more holistic understanding of the situation. First of all, why do you insist on the condemnation of the Hamas terrorist attacks of 7th October? Yes, I say terrorist attacks and have no problem speaking up, because Hamas killed and kidnapped civilians. It's true. And this is a war crime. But also, I say that the attacks on the Israeli military were justified by the Geneva Conventions because they were legitimate military targets. On the other hand, I condemn and label as pure war crimes the retaliation by IDF against civilians in Gaza, including thousands of children. And it is equally a terrorist attack with a bigger proportion. So why don't you ask Israeli officials to condemn their terrorist attacks and war crimes? I'm convinced that you would be a professional and without bias if you approach like that. Perhaps that is why some groups initiated a petition, boycott Piers Morgan, whatever its name, I don't know, but I'm strongly against any boycott against any journalists, including you. I will shortly refer to one interview that really was, how can I say, it was really frustrating to watch. It was your interview with Jeremy Corbyn and Len McCluskey about 1 month ago, after a massive anti-war protest in the UK. You did not give your guests enough space and time to explain their views. While I have seen another interview and your mild reactions while buying Mark Regev's propaganda. You know, Mark Regev, I think he's advisor to Bibi Netanyahu. I strongly believe some legal research is a must at this stage to inform the audience on the facts and what the international legal norms say about this ongoing conflict. Although I know quite well the legal viewpoint, I played with artificial intelligence just to avoid bias and accusations of being biased. For a start, I asked AI to provide in simple words answers to 2 questions, just to test the accuracy of the answers. First question was, what is the definition of genocide? And second, is the killing of occupying soldiers on the occupied territory by resisting groups considered as war crime? You see, I deliberately avoided to give AI toponyms, just in case, you know, just to focus on legal terminology. Doesn't matter which countries or which nations we are talking about. So the AI answered the following. Genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction in whole or in part of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. It involves actions such as mass killings, causing serious harm, or imposing conditions leading to the group's physical destruction. Sounds familiar, right? And second answer about killing occupying soldiers on the occupied territory by resistance groups, it says, not necessarily. The killing of occupying soldiers by resisting groups can be legal in the context of armed conflict, particularly if it occurs during hostilities. However, there are rules in international law, like the Geneva Conventions, which outline when and how force can be used in armed conflicts. The deliberate targeting of civilians, torture, or other form of unnecessary violence is generally considered war crimes, but killing occupying soldiers may not always qualify if done within the bounds of lawful warfare. What does it say? It says both sides are heavily in violation of international criminal codes concerning warfare, right? Do you agree about that? So let's elaborate on the following statement. But killing occupying soldiers may not always qualify if done within the bounds of lawful warfare. I asked AI to elaborate. What does it mean? And it says, when I mentioned that killing occupying soldiers may not always qualify if done within the bounds of lawful warfare, I'm referring to the legal framework that governs armed conflicts, particularly the rules established by international humanitarian law, which includes the Geneva Conventions. In armed conflicts, some rules dictate how military operations should be conducted to minimize unnecessary suffering and protect those not taking part in hostilities, such as civilians. Killing enemy soldiers is generally considered lawful during armed conflict, as long as it adheres to the principles of proportionality and distinction. Now it brings definition what means proportionality and distinction. So proportionality, this means that the use of force must be proportionate to the military objective. Excessive force that causes disproportionate harm to civilians or civilian property is not allowed. Distinction. This principle requires a clear distinction between combatants, such as soldiers, combatant groups like Hamas, whatever, and non-combatants, civilians. Deliberately targeting civilians is a violation of this principle. That means it's war crime. So, when we say that killing occupying soldiers may not always qualify if done within the bounds of lawful warfare, it implies that the act of proportionate, directed at legitimate military targets and avoids unnecessary harm to civilians, it may be considered legal under the rules of armed conflict. However, deliberately targeting civilians or using excessive force should still be considered a war crime. Let's imagine that a more powerful... My next question was for the AI. Let's imagine that a more powerful army surrounds a city, intending to eradicate the resistance combatants. And the stronger army uses shelling for days or weeks and kills minimum 7,000 children in a few weeks of the shelling campaign. Can this act by any international legal norms be justified? So the answer of artificial intelligence says, this scenario raises significant concerns from the perspective of international humanitarian law. Deliberate and indiscriminate targeting of civilians, especially children, is a clear violation of fundamental principles that govern armed conflicts. So, in other words, there is no excuse in Hamas attacks against civilians and military outside Gaza to launch retaliation campaign, shelling indiscriminately entire city, you know. But let's see what artificial intelligence says further. It describes principle of distinction. Deliberately targeting civilians, including children, is a violation of the principle of distinction, which requires a clear differentiation between combatants and non-combatants. Intentionally causing harm to civilians is prohibited. Principle of proportionality. The use of force must be proportionate to the military objective. If the shelling results in excessive harm to civilians compared to anticipated military advantage gained, it may constitute a violation of the principle of proportionality. You see, whenever you asked Israeli officials how many Hamas combatants have they killed? They are estimating like thousands. I don't know. We killed a lot. But there are no reliable information about how many and is it proportional. War crimes. Now I'm reading what artificial intelligence says. Deliberate attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure can be considered war crimes under international law, and those responsible can be held accountable. Concerning this, it's very difficult situation because Israel state and Israeli government doesn't recognize jurisdiction of International Criminal Court in The Hague, which is actually authorized to conduct investigation, establish facts, and so on. So my next question was, what would be a likely verdict for military and civilian leadership if, before the above described actions, they openly called through media for revenge against the resisting armed groups and cut off water, electricity for the entire city and food supplies, and ordered civilians to move from the city to the safe areas, which the more powerful army designates as the safe zones. And despite of that, they conduct shelling campaign on those safe zones. What would it be considered a war crime, or could be justified or defended by any legal norms? That was my question. And this is the answer from the machine. This scenario involves several actions that raise serious concerns under international law, and it is likely to be considered as a violation of various legal principles. Incitement to violence. Number 1. Openly calling for revenge against the resisting armed groups through the media could be considered as act of incitement to violence, potentially contributing to a hostile and dangerous atmosphere. Secondly, forcible displacements. Ordering civilians to move from the city and then conducting attacks on designated safe zones may constitute forcible displacement, which is generally prohibited under international law unless necessary for the security of the civilians involved or for imperative military reasons. But you see, it's all about safety. But targeting safe zones, shelling the safe zones where civilians are supposed to be protected, is a clear violation of the principle of distinction and the duty to protect non-combatants. You see, Israeli Defense Force, IDF, has a duty to protect Gaza civilians. They claim that they inform by whatever, by SMS and people don't have electricity. That's BS, to be honest, in my view. Or sending flyers, whatever, it's also big time BS. Don't you agree? And the last, cutting off essential services. Cutting off water electricity and food supplies for entire city can be seen as a form of collective punishment, which is also prohibited under international law. You know, whoever attended few classes of military academy, they all know about this. But many people approach this conflict with not with the power of arguments, but the argument of power, and with, I don't know, sentiments. I'm not approaching to this conflict with sentiments, but I'm trying to find some reasonable answers to widespread questions and to debunk a lot of misconceptions. So, my next question to artificial intelligence was, if all the above atrocities are committed by the more powerful military force against a confined city densely populated by civilians and to a smaller extent by armed resisting groups, would it be considered genocide by the definition of the international laws? The answer was, and don't forget, I'm from Bosnia, the country where genocide was committed, and officially there are official verdicts from International War Crime Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, which clearly said that army and police of Republika Srpska committed genocide in Srebrenica. So I know what I'm talking about when I'm speaking about genocide. So artificial intelligence says the scenario described involving deliberate and widespread attacks on a confined city densely populated by civilians, forcible displacements, targeting safe zones, and cutting off essential services raises serious concerns under international law. While the term genocide has a specific legal definition, the actions may not fit the precise criteria for genocide under the United Nations definition. So, what's the definition, like full definition? Genocide is defined under 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide as act committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. It involves specific acts such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, or deliberately inflicting conditions leading to the group's physical destruction. Yeah, in this scenario presented, while the actions are undoubtedly severe and could constitute war crimes or crimes against humanity, they may not fit the legal definition of genocide unless there is evidence of explicit intent to destroy a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So I asked further, can the repeated public statements and calls for retaliation by the civilian and military authorities of the stronger force in this scenario be considered evidence of an explicit intent to destroy a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And the machine answered, repeated public statements and calls for retaliation by civilian and military authorities, especially if they contribute to creating an atmosphere of hostility and animosity towards a specific national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, could potentially be considered evidence of intent to destroy that group. However, the assessment of intent in the context of genocide is a complex legal matter and requires careful consideration of various facts. So you see, it should be conducted independent investigation by independent experts, lawyers and investigators, to find out are there enough evidences for accusations of genocide. So further, machine says if the repeated public statements and calls for retaliation specifically target a particular group based on nationality, ethnicity, race, and religion, and if they contribute to a broader pattern of actions that intentionally harm or destroy that group, in whole, in part, or in part, it could be considered evidence of genocidal intent. So, the key is establishing a connection between the statements and systematic plan to destroy the targeted group. So, my next question was kind of provoking. Let's assume that all the above atrocities have been committed against a Semitic group. How the international courts would qualify the above-mentioned war crimes? And the machine answered, if the described atrocities have been committed against a Semitic group, international courts would evaluate the actions based on established legal frameworks and principles. The term Semitic generally refers to a linguistic group that includes various ethnic and religious communities, notably including Jewish and Arab populations. Did you know that Arabs are also Semitic? So we cannot call them anti-Semites, right? Do you agree? Legal assessment would focus on the specifics of the situation, including evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide, regardless of the ethnicity or religious affiliation of the affected group. Well done for machine. I think artificial intelligence is really improving, because this is very balanced answer and well-informed answer, by the way. So, at the end, I asked what legal actions can be carried out against the military and civilian authorities that committed the above-mentioned crimes, and they do not recognize jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. The answer was, if military and civilian authorities commit serious crimes, such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide, and do not recognize jurisdiction of International Criminal Court, there are still potential legal avenues for holding them accountable. First, ad hoc international tribunals. In situations where International Criminal Court, or ICC, does not have jurisdiction, or the responsible parties do not recognize it, the United Nations Security Council can establish an ad hoc international tribunals to prosecute individuals for serious international crimes. One of the examples I already mentioned was International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and also International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. But the key word here is United Nations Security Council can establish ad hoc. Do you think with the power of veto in Security Council of the United Nations by United States, this would be doable? I don't think so. So maybe time will show if IDF continues with this. I hope somebody in United States administration, top level, would say it's enough. And I think it is enough. I'm not going to read to you further explanations of legal norms, but my friendly advice to you is get ready, get prepared for next guests. You know, doesn't harm to have more knowledge about legal terminology and to have some wartime experience like I do. I'm war veteran, sick of the war and any war. I'm sick of suffering of any civilian, doesn't matter who they are. And in one of my episodes, I clearly said I'm not supporting any side in this conflict. Not Palestinians, not Israel. But I support only innocent civilians, especially children, who were killed, harmed, and as a result of severe violation of Geneva Conventions which protect those groups. So this is my side. I hope you would agree and you would take it as a friendly advice of somebody who was unfortunate to go through the war, survive genocide, and talk to you. So this was my episode for my channel. I wish you all the best. I wish you success. And to my viewers, until next time, warm regards from cold Sarajevo, Bosnia. Thank you very much and see you soon. Bye.